At Bird, we believe in the personal ownership of safety.
And that means understanding a construction site is a busy and constantly changing environment. There are numerous risks and challenges for me and my coworkers. And that's why identifying and controlling hazards and unsafe working conditions is so critical. It's something that we expect from everyone on our job site. Safety is everybody's responsibility. It's a responsibility that I take personal ownership of. By following our safety program and policies, I help ensure a safe environment. I'm also helping everyone go home at the end of the day, just as healthy and safe as when they arrived.
As a condition of working on a Bird site, these key Bird construction safety policies must be followed at all times. Where Bird policies differ from that of our subcontractors or clients, you must always work in accordance with the higher safety standard. All new workers to the site must receive a Bird safety program and site-specific safety orientation prior to commencing work. Also prior to commencing work activities, subcontractors are responsible for having provided proof of appropriate training for all their workers for mandatory and task-specific work they will be performing on site. For example, fall protection, confined space entry, safe drenching and excavation or ground disturbance, scaffold erection, elevated or aerial work platform operation, material lift truck or forklift operation. If proof of training has not been provided, you will not be allowed to commence those work activities. Before beginning any work activity on site each day, you are required to do the following. Complete a field-level hazard assessment identifying your tasks for the day, the actual and potential hazards associated with that work, and plans to eliminate or control the risk. FLHAs are completed individually or as a crew if the crew is performing similar work in the same work area. If completing an FLHA as a crew, each member of the crew must participate in the observation, identification, and documentation process and must sign the FLHA. Once completed, the FLHA must be reviewed and signed by a supervisor before starting work. This may be a superintendent, foreman, lead hand, or safety personnel. The supervisor will review the risks as well as the proposed controls and discuss them with you or your crew as necessary, identifying additional risks or controls as appropriate. If new tasks are assigned during the day, the FLHA must be updated to reflect the hazards and controls required for the new work, and these also have to be reviewed and signed by a supervisor prior to beginning the work. On all Bird sites, the following PPE is mandatory. CSA-approved safety glasses with side shields, CSA-approved hard hats, CSA-approved footwear, CSA-approved high visibility apparel, except Class 1. So-called spaghetti straps are not acceptable. Additionally, Bird employees are required to wear hand protection at all times. While we encourage subcontractor employees to do the same, at a minimum, subcontractor workers are required to wear suitable task-appropriate gloves where necessitated by the work activity being done. Hearing protection must be worn by all workers when exposed to noise levels in excess of the specifications in your local legislation. Where respiratory protection is required, it must be properly fitted and the worker trained in its proper use. Workers are responsible for ensuring their PPE is in good condition. If not, report it to your immediate supervisor. The supervisor must ensure that defective, damaged, or worn equipment is repaired or replaced. Safe work practices provide general information and direction on how to safely perform a task, use a tool or piece of equipment, address a worksite condition. Bird has developed extensive safe work practices, and all Bird and subcontractor workers are expected to execute work in accordance with these safe work practices where applicable. A safe work procedure is a written step-by-step description of how to do a job from start to finish. For any work that involves significant potential risk or where provincial regulations require specific written procedures for a task, Safe work procedures must be developed and renewed with your supervisor prior to the work commencing. Follow safe work practices at all times. Only operate equipment and tools you are trained and authorized to use. Tag out and remove from service any tools or equipment that is defective, damaged, worn, or missing guards or protective devices furnished by the manufacturer, and report it immediately to your supervisor, foreman, or superintendent. Do not use any tool for any purpose other than that intended by the manufacturer. Immediately report all unsafe conditions, acts, and all near misses to your supervisor. Lifting and hoisting operations are one of the leading causes of serious incidents and fatalities on construction sites. Restricted access areas must be clearly marked and cordoned off and have proper signs posted. Failure to respect restricted access areas is a serious safety violation and subject to strict disciplinary action. Mobile equipment often limits operator visibility and hearing. Workers should always exercise caution around mobile equipment and be conscious of the swing radius of lifting equipment, excavators, and other heavy equipment. When approaching mobile equipment, always make eye contact with the spotter or operator and do not pass until signaled to do so. There are 4 areas of construction activity where there is an elevated potential for serious injury or death resulting from unsafe work practices: fall protection, energy isolation, excavation and trenching, confined space. A strict disciplinary policy with respect to these 4 safety absolutes is covered later in this video. Falls from opening or from heights, even heights less than provincially legislated fall protection requirements, can result in serious injury or death. If there is a risk of falling, you must comply with all regulations and safety work practices. Guardrails, fall restraint, and fall arrest systems are all components of a comprehensive fall protection program. You must be authorized and trained to perform work of an electrical nature. Always follow appropriate procedures to positively identify and isolate all energy sources before commencing work, and appropriately mark and tag all locking devices. Before commencing work with or near electricity, consult the appropriate safe work practice, procedure, or the Bird Safety Handbook. Never enter excavations and trenches until they conform to appropriate regulations. Consult your local regulations and safety work practices and procedures prior to commencing excavating or trenching activities. Confined spaces are enclosed or partially enclosed spaces having restricted access to traffic, which may be or become hazardous to workers due to their design, construction, location, atmosphere, materials or substances in it, or other conditions. Prior to entering a confined space, a completed and signed confined space permit must be in place and be reviewed by all workers working in or entering the confined space. Poor housekeeping creates unnecessary hazards and is a leading cause of slips, trips, and falls on construction sites. Don't walk by. Housekeeping is everyone's responsibility. If you see a housekeeping hazard, address it. Keep your work area clean and tidy at all times. Ensure walkways and all exits are kept clear of all material, equipment, or debris, and are well lit and properly ventilated. Keep areas in the proximity of emergency equipment, such as fire extinguishers, hoses, and emergency PPE, clear at all times. Remove nails or sharp objects protruding from lumber, or bend them over. Properly cap all rebar or other protruding material. Eliminate or control slippery conditions. Properly contain, label, and store all hazardous materials. Separate all other materials by size, type, and length, and place them in neat piles. Take personal accountability. Clean up as you go. Don't allow waste or debris to accumulate, and don't leave it for someone else to clean up. Regular safety meetings provide an excellent opportunity for workers and supervisors to discuss all safety issues in an open and safe environment without fear of reprisal. These include weekly toolbox meetings for all bird and subcontractor crews, regular joint health and safety committee meetings, additional ad hoc meetings, and safety stand-downs to be held at the discretion of site management. Bird Construction is committed to following sound environmental management practices so that the environment is not negatively affected. All Bird Construction sites are required to develop and have in place an environmental emergency response plan prior to commencement of construction activities. In the event of a containment release, notify your supervisor immediately. Every worker is required by law to hold a valid certificate of Workplace Hazardous Material Information System training. If you do not have a valid WHMIS training certificate, you must arrange for this training with your supervisor prior to commencing work on site. A brief WHMIS quiz will follow this video as part of the orientation program. No person is allowed to work alone or in isolation unless a working alone procedure is developed and signed by the person working alone and their supervisor. At Bird, there are numerous situations where working alone is not permitted under any circumstances, and the Bird Working Alone policy and the Bird Safe Work Practice for Working Alone must be consulted prior to developing a working alone procedure. In most cases, Bird enforces discipline in a three-stage process: verbal warning, written warning, and a 3-day suspension. However, in instances where any worker willfully or repeatedly violates the safety rules and regulations, Bird will exercise strict discipline up to and including immediate and permanent termination. In situations involving the Bird Safety Absolutes, fall protection, confined space, excavation and trenching, and energy isolation, superintendents will terminate workers immediately from all Bird sites in any case involving a flagrant violation of safe work practices and policies. Where violation of a safety absolute is not clearly flagrant, workers will still receive an immediate 3-day suspension and be required to meet with a review panel before being allowed to resume work on a Bird site. All project sites must have an emergency response plan. Details of the emergency response plan for your site include site-specific hazards, first aid stations and attendants, emergency alarms or air horns, and muster stations will be covered in the site-specific portion of your orientation following this video. A listing of emergency phone numbers and contact information will be posted on site in marked locations by the site trainers and telephones. Be sure to familiarize yourself with the locations of all first aid stations, site emergency procedures, and muster points. The following are some common sense site safety rules you and your coworkers are expected to follow at all times. All workers are expected to arrive to work fit for duty. Possession, use, or being under the influence of intoxicating beverages or unauthorized drugs on the job is strictly forbidden and constitutes grounds for immediate removal from the site and termination. Horseplay, practical jokes, fighting, improper activity or behavior, gambling, and possession of firearms are strictly forbidden on the job site and are also grounds for termination. Improper activity or behavior includes the attempted or actual act of any physical force by a worker towards another worker, or any threatening statement, action, or behavior which may give the worker reasonable cause to believe they are at risk. Obey all posted signs. The use of cell phones or other personal electronic devices is prohibited in work areas, except for site business by management or supervisory personnel. Their use is limited to authorized breaks and lunchtime, and only in the lunchroom or other designated areas. Running is not permitted anywhere on site except in the case of emergency. Smoking is permitted only in designated areas. Regular audits and inspections are conducted on site, and responsibility is assigned for addressing all deficiencies and improvement opportunities. Your full cooperation in all inspections or audits is required. Bird Construction requires all workers to immediately report all worker injuries, environmental spills, property damage, near misses, safety hazards, unsafe conditions. If injured on the job, seek appropriate first aid immediately to be appropriately assessed and treated. Even minor scratches, if left uncovered, can become infected and lead to more serious problems. Report all incidents. Your full cooperation in all incident investigations is required. Bird Construction is committed to a culture of safe production on our sites so that all workers are able to return home at the end of the day healthy and safe. This requires partnership and commitment on all our part, working safely and working together every moment of every day. If you are not clear on any component of the bird safety program or your requirements while on site, or would like more information, speak to your supervisor or